What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Blood on the Razor Wire TV, where we bring it to you real and we bring it to you raw. Don't forget, we need you to hit that subscribe button. Definitely need you to hit that like button. Go ahead. I'll give you a second. Thank you. Appreciate you. Make sure you leave a comment. We're going to definitely get back to you, all right? Share the video. It's something that people probably need to hear. It's something that's real, man. We're going to talk about some real shit tonight. We're going to talk about the top 5 most dangerous and vicious prison riots ever in the United States. Let me ask you a question. When you hear about prison riots, what's the first thing that pops in your mind? What prison? For me, it's Attica State Prison. It's not a prison that I just tell you about because I read about it. It's a prison that I had spent some of my life in. It's a prison that I went to when I was 17 years old. You heard the story with me and my brother when I interviewed him, how we got into it with some dudes in Wyoming. I got stabbed in the face. I was 17 years old on Christmas Eve. And they said, hey, you're going to the hospital to get some stitches. And when you're done, we're taking you across the street. We're going to take you to Attica State Prison. At 17 years old, I was walking into Attica like, wow, are you serious? You know, I could lie to you and tell you that I wasn't scared. I wasn't nervous. But that had to be one of the times when I was most scared ever in my life. 17 years old going into Attica State Prison. I had heard all the stories. I'm only 45 minutes away from there where I live. I know that my mother's cousin was involved in that riot. I believe he lost his life over there when he was just a young man. Another one of my mother's best friends, her brother was killed at Attica. So I'd always heard these stories growing up. And now here I was, 17 years old, going to Attica State Prison. Like, wow. You know, that could be you. You could be that kid going to Attica State Prison. Some people might want to know, why are you doing a video on prison riots? And I'm going to tell you it's because I had read this book, and now you're going to know where Blood on the Razor Wire title came from, right? Read this book called Blood in the Water while I was in prison. It was about the Attica Uprising of 1971 and its legacy. And I read that book, and shortly after that, there was a guy that used to come into the prison. He was a former rocket scientist. He would bring in videos for us, things from the street. And he had brought in this documentary, right? And it was about that stuff that happened in Charleston, where that kid had ran over that girl. Riots were set off. He killed her, unfortunately for her, unfortunately for her family. All respect to her family. And they had talked about how riots start. And why I'm watching this, I'm thinking about the things that I had heard in prison and how people were on the verge of doing things in certain prisons that I was at, where people were finally tired of being oppressed. Someone might be watching this video and say, come on, man, being oppressed. Yeah, man. People in prison are oppressed. You heard the nurse the other day talk about it in the interview, right? About how the cops treat people. They treat you like you're nobody, man. Treat you like you're nothing. And you know what? People get tired of it. And you've probably seen that video about Attica, years ago, right? What was that? 1994, 1995. Remember the black dude was screaming, hot soup! Hot soup! Remember that movie? I'll have to find the name of it. But I vividly remember that. Attica Riots. How do riots start? And that's what I was talking about with that thing over there and that riot where that kid ran that girl over. You know, in that documentary, they said that there's a whole bunch of gasoline always on the ground. And they're just waiting for the spark. They're just waiting for that one person to set it off. And sometimes in prison, that's what happens. There's always gasoline. There's always gasoline. But you're always waiting for the spark. I had always thought while I was in prison that, man, it's going to happen. People are getting tired of this stuff. And when they revolted in Attica, one of the brothers said, we revolt simply because, for many reasons, we can no longer breathe. This was said in 1971. We can no longer breathe. Elliot Barkley, a prisoner in Attica, said, what has happened here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed. He had been writing his mother. And he told his mother, I'm dying in here, little by little. I'm dying. What did he mean by he was dying? You know what he meant. He was being mistreated. He was being taken advantage of, man. Being beaten, assaulted. And they do that stuff in New York. Pretty well known for it. Cops are well known for carrying these oak sticks. They swing them on these little rubber bands and they whack people with them. And back then, man, it's easy to admit that a lot of them correctional officers, man, they were from the country. Racist, looked at these New York City guys like they weren't shit. So let's read a little bit, all right? On September 9th, 1971, nearly 1,300 prisoners took over the Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York to protest years of mistreatment. And I read a bunch of the documents on this too. A bunch of the stuff that was in the lawsuit. Holding guards and civilian employees hostage, the prisoners negotiated with officials for improved conditions during the 4 long days and nights that followed. On September 13th, the state abruptly sent hundreds of heavily armed troopers and correctional officers to retake the prison by force. And that they did. They took it by force. Their gunfire killed 39 men, hostages, as well as prisoners, and severely wounded more than 100 others. In the ensuing hours, weeks, and months, troopers and officers, this is the part, man, listen to this, brutally retaliated against the prisoners. And ultimately, New York State authorities prosecuted only the prisoners. Only the prisoners. It was okay that they tortured these men, that they lit them on fire, that they made them crawl and run across glass butt naked. They left them out in the yard, cold temperatures, with no clothes on, laying in mud and dirt. Many of these men weren't even involved in any type of violence. In the ensuing hours, weeks, and months, troopers and officers brutally retaliated against the prisoners. And ultimately, New York State authorities prosecuted only the prisoners, never once bringing charges against the officials involved in the retaking and its aftermath, and neglecting to provide support to the survivors and the families of the men who had been killed. I had to read that again because I wanted to sink in. The only people prosecuted were the prisoners, right? The castaways, the no goods, the less desirable. Drawing from more than a decade of extensive research, historian Heather Ann Thompson sheds new light on every aspect of the uprising and its legacy, giving voice to all those who took part in this 45-year fight for justice. Check out the book, man. Blood in the Water. Blood in the Water. Like I said, one of the best books I ever read. I want to talk a little bit more about Attica and the things that happened there. On September 9, 1971, tensions boiled over as more than 1,000 prisoners, including Harrison, revolted, seizing 39 guards as hostages and gaining control of the prison. Documentary filmmaker Stanley Nelson tells the story of the uprising in his film Attica. Nelson describes the takeover as a terrifying event for both prisoners and guards. Think about it. Let's say you're just a regular old cat, right? You're in prison, you're serving 5 years, you're sitting in Attica State Prison, you did a burglary, you might have been using drugs, and now there's a full-fledged riot. Everybody's on the yard. You see the pictures. Everybody's on the yard, pissed off, angry, screaming, yelling, we're tired. Some people come together to be leaders, other people are off the chain. There were sociopaths and psychopaths in the yard, he says. And it was this really strange dynamic that you have to be scared of the people in the yard, and you've got to be scared of law enforcement, which are on the walkways and the towers that surround the prison with guns, aiming guns down on all the prisoners in the yard. How about the cops? How about the cops that were taken hostage? And they're like, yo, this is it, man. This is it. The standoff in the prison became a national drama as reporters and TV cameras were allowed inside the prison yard as one of the prisoners' demands. So the prisoner said, look, you guys want to negotiate? We got your people. See these cops over here? We got them. We're going to make sure they don't make it home to their families unless you meet our demands. And one of them is, we want a camera in here. And why do we want a camera? Because we want the people to know. We want the world to know how we're being treated. And you know what? From a prisoner standpoint, I know them dudes were tired. And probably many of them didn't want to hurt anybody. They didn't want to do anything to anybody. They just wanted to be treated with respect. Men respect men, right? But not back then. Not in that prison. Even now. New York State Prison is a place where they disrespect you, man. They treat you like shit. I witnessed it, man. I witnessed it in Comstock. I witnessed the Muslims get it on with the police over there because they were tired of it, man. And that's one time when I thought, wow, this is going to be another full-fledged riot, and I'm going to be here. I'm going to be a part of this. It didn't pan out that way, but them dudes definitely got busy. They fought the cops. It was real. 5 days after it started, the uprising ended in a bloody assault by law enforcement. Harrison was shot in the back of his arm, and 39 prisoners and hostages were killed, all by law enforcement gunfire. All by law enforcement gunfire. So the 9 hostages, the 9 employees of the New York State Department of Corrections, which it was called back then, right? They get murdered. They get killed. They get shot. And who did it? Their brothers, man. The Blue Wall. After the smoke cleared, prisoners were stripped naked and forced to crawl through a latrine and then to run down a hall between two rows of guards who beat them as they ran. Remember we talked about them sticks? These dudes were running across broken glass, getting hit with these sticks, getting punched, kicked. There were dudes that were laid out on tables out on the yard. And the guard stood over the top of them and threw lit cigarette butts on them. And made him hold a football with his chin, Big Frank. And told him, if you drop that football, we're going to kill you. They punched him. They threatened to cut off his manhood, man. They beat him in his balls. In his words, he said, they beat me in my balls. There was nothing he could do but lay there and take it. How would you have felt if you were in that position? You're in this riot. People are yelling. People are screaming. You're getting beat by the cops. Would you be in that moment like, you know what, man, I'd rather be dead, man. And, you know, if you read Blood in the Water, you're going to see pictures where there were pictures of guys, prisoners, taken on the yard that they shot and killed, man. They shot and killed these dudes out there. And then they got pictures of them in the evidence box of him with no weapon. And then they got another picture of a knife this big laying next to him. So after they shot him and killed him, they put the knife by him and said, hey, we had to kill him, to try to cover their back. But they didn't know that someone else had already taken a picture of the guy dead without the sword, without the knife laying next to him. Shit was real, man. You know, in our system now, we hear a lot about prison reform and the feds and this and that, but you've seen the videos in Alabama. And, you know, I don't promote this in any prison, but you've seen the videos of how people are being treated, how people are treating one another. Florida and Georgia killing each other. And sometimes I think that we're on the verge of another Attica or some of the other riots we're going to talk about like that in New Mexico and the Ohio State Prison riot. We're going to talk about those in a minute. Nelson says the story of Attica Prison Revolt is one about race, class, power, and prison reform, themes that remain resonant today. So let me tell you, when I was in New York State Prison on the Attica anniversaries, you know, they give these big metal spoons. We'd walk the child, take the spoon, and drop it in the bucket. In remembrance of those people that died, man. Those people died for reform. Those people died because they were tired of being mistreated. And because of them, a lot of things that we see in prison now, like prison programs, rehabilitation programs, even though a lot of them suck, school, books, magazines, some sort of decency, that stuff is in place because of that Attica riot. Make no mistake. Those Attica riots, man. Those brothers lost their lives. They lost their lives so that perhaps we could have just a little bit more in prison. And I always felt like, man, it was on the verge. Conditions in prison have probably gotten a little bit better since 1971. They get more toilet paper now, he says. But there's 2 million people in prison in the United States. 2 million people will not see the sky at night tonight. Think about that, man. You're watching this video tonight. When the video ends, go outside and look at the sky. Go out there and count a couple of them stars. Because that's something that you're not going to see, man. You go to prison, you're going to be inside when it gets dark. You're not going to be able to look up and see the stars, man. Yard's closed. Dust starts to roll in, yard is closed. I used to think about that when I was in Raybrook, because at night, me and another kid, we worked a job where we would go out and give the call-outs out to all the units. Call-outs are pieces of paper where it tells everybody where they need to be tomorrow. If you got a doctor's appointment, if you got to go to the dentist, if you got to go to the school. And I would walk outside at night and breathe in that cold air in Raybrook, New York. And I would look at the sky. And it was in those moments, man, when you really appreciated your freedom. Like, I felt free. Ain't that crazy? In prison, surrounded by razor wire and fences and concrete walls. In prison buildings, I felt free. Just for that moment. Because there were no cops on the walkway. It was just me. Passing out those little call-outs with my partner. So this dude Harrison, man, he had gave an interview about the Attica Riots. He was 21 years old when all this happened. He said they would come in with 4 or 5 guys. They would rush a guy in a cell. You have no way of keeping 4 or 5 guys off you unless you were a Superman or somebody like that. They would beat you down, drag you out the cell, and take you to the box where you would get beaten again. The box. New York State, we call it the box. Other people call it solitary confinement. One of the most mental, excruciating things that I've ever experienced was the box in New York State Prison. Never forget it. The conditions were just horrible, and the guards were not trained at all. Attica, New York, is about 250 miles from New York City. It's in a very rural community. The only jobs there would be dairy farming or working in the prison. And the community was all white. But also at the same time, coming in from the outside was change. There was George Jackson, who was preaching change, and Malcolm X, and the Black Panthers, and the Young Lords. That was all happening at the same time. And Mr. Nelson tells us how the uprising began. He says Attica was divided into 4 sections. I was there. And the hallways all met at this place called Times Square. You ever been to Attica? You know what Times Square is. So Times Square was like the center hub. And when the prisoners started to rebel, started to riot, they started banging on the gates at Times Square. And one of the gates had a faulty weld in the gate. And the gate came down. And it broke. And the prisoners seized the guards there at Times Square. And so then the prisoners controlled the prison. And it happened really quickly. And in some ways, it was really because of this faulty welding job that was done. We think from when the prison was first built. It was that one weld that changed history. These guys were able to breach that door, get into that tower, and say, you know what? It's our turn now. The Rapids got the gun now. It's our turn. Tired of being mistreated, man. Why did the prisoners put the guards in prison uniforms? You know they did that, right? I'm sure you guys have seen some of this. The point for that was when someone would try to retake the prison with guns like they did, they wouldn't know who were prisoners or which one was a guard. So it would be careful about the shooting. There was a whole point of that. They wouldn't have to come in blazing and shooting because they didn't want to kill their comrades. But they killed them anyway, didn't they? New York State troopers, law enforcement. They said, man, we're about to take this prison back. And if you're sitting down there and you got captured, well, too bad. We're taking the prison back and you're going to pay for it with your life. We're going to take it. On the prisoners having 30 demands, including amnesty for the uprising. The prisoners' demands were really just to be treated as human beings. They were getting more toilet paper, getting more visiting hours, things like that, things that could easily be met. And to the prisoner commissioner, Russell, Oswald's credit, he very quickly agreed to 28 of the 30 demands. They agreed. The one demand that everything hinged on was amnesty, because the prisoners wanted amnesty. Not for the crimes that they had committed outside of prison that got them there. They wanted amnesty for anything that was done in the rebellion, because there was a real fear that all of the prisoners would be tried en masse for everything, for destroying property, for injuring Billy Quinn, another one of the guards that they took. I think they killed Quinn, right? For taking prisoners, kidnapping, everything. So the prisoners were asking for amnesty for anything that happened during the riot. It was really a law enforcement riot. Over 500 law enforcement agents, state troopers, and ex-prison guards, whatever, stormed the prison with rifles. They came into prison with rifles, with shotguns. Some of them had handguns. And they were up on the catwalks, and first tear gas was shot down on the prisoners. So it was all smoky, and law enforcement really couldn't see anything. They were just firing down randomly at the prisoners. Check that out. Just firing, man. Just letting loose. We can't see shit. We're just going to shoot. And whoever we hit, we hit. We want them to know that we mean business. We're taking this prison back. And really, the prisoners, man, didn't want to take the prison and commit violence, right? They didn't kill the hostages. The cops did. You know, when you really dig in, man, all the prisoners wanted was to be treated like men. Stop mistreating us, man. We want hot food. We want to visit our families. We don't want you calling us racist names and treating us like shit. All we want is respect, man. We want the small things that we're entitled to. Nothing more, nothing less. And they want to turn it into something else, that it was something bigger than that. Harrison says, I've seen people getting shot at before, but not like this. People were laying on top of people and stuff, hollering from the pain of being shot, and they weren't getting no help. What kind of human being does that to another human being? You think about it. And what did they tell the public about the guards that got killed? They incorrectly said that the 10 guards killed had their throats slit. They wanted to make these prisoners look like demons. It's all because of them. Look what they did to our people. We had to go in there and shoot them dead. They were slitting their throats. The original report was that hostages had had their throats cut. And that part of the reason why that was thought at first was because prisoners brought the guards out into the yard and did put knives to their throats. Homemade knives to their throat. And they thought that maybe that would stop the assault. It was just a threat. When the attack actually happened, was found out the next day that no guards had gotten their throats slit at all. But yet they told the people that in the media. That's what you heard on the news. And the 10 guards that were killed were all killed by gunfire. What? Gunfire? The cops killed their own people. I think the medical examiner actually said the truth the next day. But what happened was the first report on the news was that they had their throats slit, so that was believed. The reaction is not heard in the same way as the first statement. So to this day, some people still believe that the hostages' throats were slit, although no hostages' throats were slit at all. Think about that, man. No hostages had their throats slit, but that's what they told the media. Why would they do such a thing? They wanted to justify what they did when they went in there and killed them people, man. Riots. What do you think is the next most vicious riot? Make no mistake, man, on my list, Attica's the number one. Dangerous, dangerous. You ever want to be in a riot, man? That shit ain't cool, man. That shit ain't fun. It's definitely devastating, man. And it's a place where, let's keep it real, man, anybody could lose their lives, man. In a riot, man, they're in there shooting like that, it gets bad. New Mexico. You ever heard about the New Mexico Riot in 1980? Crazy the shit that happened there, man. They took some of the prisoners, and I've seen a documentary on it where they had these torches and they lit this one guy's head on fire and just had a torch to him. And I know this sounds crazy, man. And his shit got so hot that his eyes blew out of his head, man. According to that documentary. On a frigid February night in 1980, a group of inmates in a dormitory at the Penitentiary of New Mexico began drinking a potent home brew created from fermented raisins and yeast, smuggled from the prison's kitchen. Remember I talked about when people get drunk, what happens in prison? Gets worse than beer muscles, I promise you that. By 10:30 p.m., then State Attorney General Jeff Bingham would later report they were drunk and angry and talking loudly about taking over the place. Were they pissed off about their conditions, about being mistreated? The penitentiary, constructed in 1956, but in a state of neglect by the early 80s, had a capacity of about 900 men. On that night, it was teeming with 1,157 men. Remember Jimmy Mack, how we talked about the federal prison being so overcrowded they were putting 3, 4, 5 dudes in a cell and giving them shit to make wine with? What happens when the prison's overcrowded? People are on top of each other. People become agitated. People get angry. More people bump into you. Yeah, small things, right? Not really when you're living that way 24/7, 7 days a week. And you have no peace. You have nowhere you can go to get any peace. And sometimes in prison, you need peace. You need a break. Many who had complained for years about living conditions said they were substandard, violent, and fertile breeding ground for a riot. I got this tattoo on my side, man. It says, "Beware the fury of a patient man." Sometimes people release their fury, man. And in the next few hours in the early morning of February 2nd, that's exactly what began to unfold. Inmates in dormitory E2 feigned sleep as 3 cops made their way through the area to shut down an adjacent day room. The prisoners struck quickly, overpowering the guards. Thus began one of the deadliest episodes in New Mexico history, a roughly 36-hour frenzy of brutality and murder that left much of the prison south of Santa Fe a smoking hulk. When it was over, one of the most violent inmate uprisings in U.S. history would leave these gut-wrenching statistics. 33 dead. Scores injured. Millions of dollars in damage. Amazingly, no guards were killed, but a dozen were held hostage, brutally beaten or sodomized. Why did they beat these guards? Why did they sodomize them? 2 wrongs don't make a right. And sometimes people just unleash their fury and their violence and their anger from being mistreated, man. Many more were scarred by the images of what they saw and experienced. Even now, 40 years after the riot, those who witnessed the uprising firsthand are loath to recall the carnage that unfolded inside the prison. But as survivors of the catastrophe grow fewer with each passing year, the events that took place that weekend at Old Main continue to shape and haunt New Mexico Corrections Department policy today. Could you imagine seeing people being lit with a torch on their head? Disaster in waiting. In the years leading up to the riot, many had predicted disaster for the state's prison system, particularly at the state pen south of Santa Fe, which was badly overcrowded. One inmate, Dwight Duran, had filed a lawsuit in 1977, claiming conditions there violated prisoners' constitutional rights to be free from cruel and unusual punishment. Was that cruel and unusual for him to have to see the things that he had seen? Experience the things that he had experienced? Throughout its history, the penitentiary of New Mexico has suffered from neglect. Bingham, who later would become a U.S. Senator, wrote in his post-uprising report. The New Mexico prison has always waited at the end of the line for public money, and elected officials have turned their attention to the ugly problems of the penitentiary only when the institution has erupted in violence and destruction. Lack of space, inadequate programs, and understaffing have all been part of the prison's tradition. What does that tell us, man, as a society? We got to do a better job at treating men like men, treating women like women, not mistreating prisoners. Yeah, I guess we don't have to have birthday cakes and ice cream. But the small things that we are entitled to, we should get. And sometimes, when the cops go in and destroy your cell and rip your cell up, throw shit all over the floor, act like you ain't shit, when they come in and handcuff you and punch you in the face, and we've seen plenty of that, right? Even on this channel. That shit ain't right, man. They spit on you. That shit happens. They treat you like, I don't even want to say an animal, because animals shouldn't be treated like that. By many accounts, the inmates' unbridled rage was an outgrowth of atrocious living conditions inside what was then the state's only maximum security prison, a place saddled with overcrowding, corruption, and frequent inmate abuse perpetrated by untrained, and underpaid correction officers. Finally, the pen just boiled over. Then Governor Bruce King would later recall in his book, Cowboy in the Roundhouse. About 2 a.m. on Saturday, February 2nd, the emergency phone beside my bed in the mansion rang, startling me awake. It was Chief Martin Vigil of the state police, and my stomach knotted up in apprehension. Why did it knot up? Or is that just something he was saying? Something he wanted the media to hear? Did he really give a shit? Because if he gave a shit, maybe he should have stepped in. Maybe he should have long stepped in when there were rumors that things were starting to escalate. It was more than serious, almost from the start, as violence cascaded from one part of the facility to another. In the first moments of the uprising, inmates looped a belt around the neck of one of the guards they'd taken hostage and began to push and kick him northward toward the prison's control center. According to Bingman's report, the guard had been beaten so badly, guards in the control center didn't even recognize him. They unleashed that violence, man. But they soon had another problem. Prisoners began attacking an observation window, eventually shattering it with a fire extinguisher. Their break-in into the control center was accomplished in 3 to 5 minutes. 3 to 5 minutes. In 22 minutes, the inmates had taken over the institution. Soon, hundreds of convicted felons were rampaging through the facility, smashing sinks, toilets, and radiators, and setting fire to furnishings and files. They didn't have computers back then. What if they lit your file on fire and it was all ashes and you climbed the fence? Would they have been able to find you? As anarchy descended upon the facility, frightened prisoners banded together based on race, proximity, and previous alliances. Gangs of inmates brandishing metal pipes, chair legs, and other makeshift weapons, many wearing gas masks or bandanas to hide their faces and protect them from the smoke, prowled the main corridor ankle deep in a slurry of water, sewer effluent, paper, and blood. They invaded the prison's administrative offices, dumping cabinets full of official records into the middle of the room and setting them ablaze. They set fire to punching bags, and some say bodies, in the gymnasium, causing the wood floor to catch fire and creating an inferno so hot the metal beams supporting the roof began to sag. They pillaged butcher knives and food from the prison's kitchen, and they plundered the prison pharmacy. Went in there and took the drugs, huh? The men who started the uprising formed informal death squads with their comrades in Cell Block 3, who were, like them, some of the most dangerous men in the institution, and set about settling scores with child molesters housed in protective custody. The men murdered in this part of the prison were brutally tortured and mutilated. Remember the guy we just talked about with the torch? Guides on a recent corrections department tour of the facility, which was closed in 1998 and is now used as a movie set and tourist attraction, point out hack marks in the concrete floor where one man was beheaded, though they don't allow photos of the spot. They identify a smoky black stain where another inmate had his eyeballs gouged out before he was burned to death with a welding torch. You want to go to prison, man? Because I'm telling you, man, this shit's on the verge of happening again. And you don't want to be there when it does. Trust me, you do not want to be there when it does. You know, in federal prison, some guys put these batteries in their door and they braid a sheet, hook a belt on there where they can tie their door closed because we don't have the ability to lock the door. They braid it and then they tie it to the bed where you can't open the door. You can't get in this door. But you know what? Prisoners are innovative people. If there was a riot for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days and someone wanted to get you, they're going to get in that door. I promise you that. Let me see. The men murdered in this part were brutally. Man, welding torch. Can you believe that, man? Then, you know, there was a bargain, you know. There was a bargain. Prisoners told them what they wanted. Inmate negotiators who initially demanded sweeping reforms and the resignation of despised correctional officials narrowed their demands to post-riot protection for inmates, no more harassment from prison guards, and out-of-state transfers for negotiators. By the mid-afternoon Sunday, the prison had been retaken. The riot, like some kind of fast-moving tornado, was finally over. The mess was not. Just think about that, man. Think about being in there and you got 4 or 5 dudes come and take you right out of your cell. Because it could happen, man. Everything in prison is subject to change. Don't ever forget that. Today it's good. Tomorrow it could be extremely bad. So bad that you can't handle the bad. Or perhaps you are in prison and you just see this shit happen. Do you think it would affect you for the rest of your life? To see someone beheaded? This is the United States of America, man. Could you imagine watching someone get their head chopped off? Cut off with a prison shank? How long did that take? Could you imagine how it would affect you to see someone burned with a torch until they die and their eyes pop out? I would never in my life want to experience something like that. I'm just being honest with you. Never, ever. Another big prison riot. Some of the Ohio guys in the house. You know all too well. April 11th, 1993. 450 prisoners, right? One of the largest crises in Ohio prison history began on April 11th, 1993, when 450 prisoners rioted at the maximum security Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville. The ensuing standoff between rioters and law enforcement lasted 11 days, capturing the nation's attention. Here are 7 things worth remembering 25 years after the incident. The violence started early. 5 inmates, all believed to be prison snitches, were brutally beaten to death in the opening hours of the riot. At least 2 of them were repeatedly stabbed. One of them at least 22 times, according to the results of autopsies. Another inmate killed in an adjoining cell block on day 3 of the riot was strangled by cords after paper and plastic were shoved in his mouth. Paper and plastic shoved in your mouth. There's nothing you can do. These dudes are wrestling you down and jamming shit in your mouth. And then they're going to choke you with some cords. What, off the television? The prison was built by the father of Ohio's governor. The Cleveland architect who designed the state's only maximum security prison was George S. Vonovich, father of George Vonovich, who presided as Ohio's governor during the incident. My mother reminded me during all of this, that my father had questioned the wisdom of building it in the first place. A weary Governor Vonovich said at the time. He knew the questions about building a prison in such a rural location. Let's get into some of the content of what happened down there, man. You wouldn't want to be there, would you? I'm sure we've all heard about, at least I heard about, these riots, and the smell of burnt mattresses still lingers in the corridors leading to L Block. Beyond the iron bars, trash and debris line walls. The mess of the riot-scarred Southern Ohio Correctional Facility is evident in the corridor, but that doesn't really convey the human tragedy of the 11-day prison siege. 11 days of total chaos, total mayhem, fires, murder, beatings. Man, think about that, man. Think about that. You're stuck here. You can't get out. You might be next. Maybe some of the dudes start drinking. Somebody decides they never liked you. You know what? Let's get them. They want to get you. What can you do? Think about it. What can you do when 4 or 5 dudes are on you, man? There's not much you can do. Not much at all. Man, I couldn't even imagine being in that position. So let's go ahead and get into some of this, man. Over 11 days, 9 inmates and a prisoner guard died. So 1 guard dies in this riot, right? And 11 prisoners. Among contributing factors were a fear among Muslim inmates that prison officials were going to force them to be vaccinated for tuberculosis, which would have been a religious breach, according to them. The standoff ended April 21st, 1993, after prisoners and law enforcement agreed to 21 terms of surrender, including a promise to review complaints over TB testing. 5 inmates sentenced to death for their roles in the uprising remain imprisoned. 5 inmates sentenced to death. 5 dudes got the death penalty for this shit. Sitting on death row. A fight among inmates escalated into a riot Sunday at a maximum security prison, with inmates killing at least 5 fellow prisoners and holding at least 8 guards hostage, authorities said. At least 15 other people were injured at the Southern Central Ohio prison, including 10 guards and 5 inmates. Inmates were persuaded by negotiators to release the bodies of the dead early Monday morning. Hey, buddy, can you send the dead bodies out? Who are they? Jim Johnson, okay. Michael Smith. Send them bodies out for us, buddy. We're going to negotiate with you. What kind of negotiating did they think they were going to do? Did they not realize that these people were going to prosecute them? Probably didn't even think they'd get the death penalty. It's just a prison riot. We just killed other prisoners. You could be that dude, man. You could be that dude that they kill. The prisoners were apparently beaten to death. The inmates didn't have firearms, but were armed with batons taken from guards. They suffered extensive injuries. I think it's pretty obvious who killed them. Our staff wouldn't do that. Or would they? Did the staff do it? What are the hidden secrets in that Ohio prison riot? Blame it on the inmates and put them on death row. They're the ones that did it. We're the cops. We're the good guys. We don't do shit like that. We know all too well that isn't true. Remember? They slit the guards' throats. No, you guys shot them. Attica. She didn't know when the inmates were killed. Their names were being withheld pending notification of relatives. A 9th guard who was taken hostage was rescued when prison officials and the State Highway Patrol took back the recreation yard around 10 p.m. This is an old article that came out at the time. The inmates in the yard did not want to be involved, so there was little to no resistance. No shots were fired. An inmate and the released officer had been injured, apparently in the melee earlier. The extent of their injuries was not immediately known. The inmate was taken into custody, authorities said. Scota County Sheriff's Senior Dispatcher Phil Malone described the disturbance as a full-scale riot at the prison, which houses some of the state's most dangerous inmates. The gasoline was leaking, man. The fire was ready. The fury was there. And the violence was unleashed. The inmates who were talking with the negotiators asked to appear on a live broadcast. Maybe they learned that from the Attica Riots. We want to go out on the yard and be on a live podcast, or we want to go out to the TV stations. We want everyone to see what's going on, and this is what we want. They said if they could do the broadcast, they might free the hostages. The disturbance apparently happened at the end of the afternoon recreation period in a 5-acre yard. There are usually about 130 guards assigned to the shift, but as few as 80 may have been on duty. The officers could have been off for Easter, he said. Trick or treat. Happy Easter. Unbelievable, right? Riot control teams from other prisons and the State Highway Patrol were at the prison, which holds 1,819 inmates. 1,819 prisoners, man. Total chaos. Total chaos. The last disturbance at the prison, which was built in 1972, occurred in October 1985 when 5 inmates held 2 guards hostage for about 15 hours. A teacher visiting the prison was killed in June 1990, and an inmate was stabbed to death in September 1990. Crazy, man. Crazy riot. Who wants to be in a prison riot? Raise your hand. You want to be that guy? You want to put your hand up. You know, we talk a lot about prison, about the things that happen in prison. But it's done for a reason, man, because I want you to wake up. I want you to see what's really going on, man. This shit ain't just talk, man. This shit really happens. And I'm telling you again that we're on the verge, if things don't get better, of seeing something like this. I don't promote that shit. But I'm telling you, I see it, man. It's brewing. There's gasoline all over the place. And all it's going to take is one spark to ignite it. What do you think dudes are doing that got life sentences that ain't never getting out? What do they got to lose? I don't know. The Lee Correctional Prison Riot. We talked about this. This is a recent one, right? The Lee Correctional Prison Riot occurred at Lee Correctional Institution in Bishopville, South Carolina. Number 4 on the list. It was a close third. United States on April 15, 2018. Starting as a prison cell robbery, violence began between prison gangs intensified into a full-blown riot, leading to the death of 7 prisoners. Here we are, man. Prison gangs fighting each other creates a big riot. Melee, violence, anger, hatred, gasoline, fire. Think about it. It was the most violent prison riot in the United States within the last 25 years. On December 3rd, 2020, 29 Lee Correctional Institution inmates were indicted. Remember this. Kind of like that Ohio thing. Indicted on murder and mayhem charges by the state of South Carolina. They got the death penalty down there. Sometimes you get the death penalty when you're a prisoner just being in prison. Some other prisoner can inflict a death penalty on you with a bone crusher. Lee Correctional is the largest prison for males in the state of South Carolina. Built in 1990 as a high-security prison. There's 2 yards, the east and the west. The east and the west yards. The prison has issues with 3 prison gangs. The Bloods, the Gangster Disciples, and the Crips. The Bloods make up the largest share of the prison population, which has led to the Gangster Disciples and the Crips occasionally working together. The riot started in the F3 housing unit and spread from there. The riot began after prisoner Michael Millage was fatally stabbed. For those of you that don't know what fatally means, he was killed, stabbed to death, during a prison cell robbery in the F3 housing unit near the unit's common area called The Rock. Did Michael have something that the other people wanted? What was it? Was it worth losing your life over? Because I'm sure the dude that killed him, I'm sure they know who it is. Gonna lose his life, man. Everybody loses. The assailant, DeMonte Rivera, was a member of the Disciples. Rivera was confronted by a member of the Bloods and was fatally stabbed in the neck. Oh, okay. Put that together, huh? Old Michael Millage gets stabbed by DeMonte Rivera. Michael gets killed. There's some retribution. DeMonte gets killed. This event led to armed prisoners rushing to the Rock while other prisoners fled to their cells. Violence spread from the F3 unit into other prison wings. Some prisoners affiliated with the Gangster Disciples and the Crips sought Raymond Scott, a high-ranking Blood, staying in the F5 unit. Think about that. Sometimes, a lot of times, when there's a riot like this, they know who the number 1 guy is, who's the shot caller. He's the number 1 target. And I can tell you from experience, man, when we were involved in situations in Big Sandy, you know, the shot caller, the big homie, he said, this is how we're going to do it, man. It was all planned methodically. When we were going to hit Dinky and them, they're like, hey, 4 of us are hitting Dinky. You 3 are hitting this dude. You 5 are hitting this dude. And they meant it, man. We were going to hit these dudes, man. And it was, man, I hate to say it like that, but it was balls to the wall, man. We could have lost our lives, man. So the Gangster Disciples and the Crips sought out Raymond Scott, a high-ranking Blood staying in the F5 unit. Scott and inmate Joshua Jenkins were murdered. The shot caller was murdered as they attempted to flee, knife-wielding inmates near the prison's gate. They tried to get away, man, and they couldn't. After the killing of Scott, remember I talked about that before? Damn, bro, he was out there fighting, man, till they killed him. He was doing good, man, for like 3 minutes, and then they stabbed him in the heart. You want to be that high-ranking Crip, Blood, Gangster Disciple, AB member, ARM member, SAC member, that they like, hey, he's the shot caller. Look what they did to our people. We're going to get him. He's going to pay for it. Atonement for the sins of his brothers. We're going to take his blood. After the killing of Scott, violence spread to the F1 housing unit, the closest unit to the prison's administrative building. Members of the Crips living in F1 were targeted in retribution for the murder of Scott. Remember how we talked about, man, you can just get killed, man, just being somewhere? You're not even involved. You don't even know what's going on. You're watching TV. They send a message through the window in sign language. Hey, man, hit them dudes. Hit them Crips. Hit them GDs. You're watching TV. You're a GD. Boom. You don't even know there's a riot. That's going on down the block, another unit. And you're stabbed in the neck. Now you're laying on the ground, looking up at the fluorescent lights. And you're taking your last breath. I know I don't want to be that dude. And I can guarantee, man, all that tough guy shit can go out the window. Because when you look in the mirror tonight, ask yourself, you want to be that dude? When it's just you alone in that mirror, you know you don't want to be that dude. But only you can change your path. Only you. You're the writer of your own story. You're going to determine how the story ends. The disturbance was the most violent riot in the United States within nearly the last 25 years. In its aftermath, prison officials sent 48 prisoners to a private prison in Mississippi. I bet your life got a whole lot worse. On December 3rd, 2020, indictments were announced by the South Carolina Attorney General, Alan Wilson, and the Department of Corrections Director, Brian Sterling, containing charges of conspiracy, murder, assault and battery by a mob, and prisoners carrying a weapon, according to the indictments. You knew they weren't going to just let these people ride, right? Price to pay, man. Shit's all over the national news. Someone's going to pay the price. You're going to pay for it with your life. You're going to pay for it with another 10, 15 years in prison. Something's going to happen. Something's definitely going to happen. It's not just going down like that. All them dudes are probably sitting in that Mississippi prison. The ones that got the murder charges, like, damn, man. Definitely ain't never getting out of here now. I'm not sure if they got the death penalty down there. I think they do. Could be wrong. Could be wrong. Correct me if I am. Here's another riot. We're on the last one now, right? That was number 4. Let's talk about this riot. Montana. You probably wouldn't think Montana. Deadly prison riot in Montana. Are you serious, Chad? Never heard of it. Maybe you haven't, but I have. 5 inmates were killed in a state prison disturbance Sunday. This was in September 1991. Apparently by other inmates, a prison official said. 5 guards were taken hostage, were freed unharmed when a tactical unit stormed the maximum security cell block. Prison warden Jack McCormick, who confirmed the casualty toll, said it had not been determined how the prisoners died, but that no weapons were found in the cell block. He said inmates were seen and heard beating other inmates. Imagine getting beat to death. 4 or 5 guys beating you on you. You know, we heard about it. We talked about it in a couple other videos. It's clear to us that these inmates were dead when we entered the building. They must have been killed by other inmates in the prison, said Kirk Chisholm, the state correctional director. 8 other inmates were injured in the melee. The warden said the dead inmates and 4 of the injured had been in protective custody. They were in protective custody, man. They've been threatened by other inmates. The Montana State Prison cell block was damaged by prisoners with extensive fire and water damage, the warden said at a news conference. These dudes were tucked away in protective custody, thought they were safe. And what happened? They weren't safe. When all hell broke loose, they ended up dead, man. Members of the tactical unit fired tear gas, but they fired only 1 gunshot, and it did not strike anyone, the warden said. McCormick said he decided to storm the cell block after officers outside the building saw and heard some inmates being beaten. The knowledge that lives were in danger is the very reason the assault on the facility took place early this afternoon, he said. I think the cops really cared about their lives. Do you? Especially back then? No. Do you think other inmates killed them, or do you think the cops did it? You think about it. The warden said the 55 inmates left in the cell block would have to be moved elsewhere temporarily. The rescue came about 4 hours after inmates took over the maximum security unit, the state's only men's prison, about 80 miles west of Helena, Montana. The unit had 7 guards, but 2 in a control booth escaped. It was also not immediately known how the prisoners overpowered the guards. And here's one of the problems, man. We see it all the time. The prison housed 1,178 inmates as of September 17th. It was designed to house 750, but officials say its emergency capacity is 1,135. Really, it's designed for 750 people, man. You're living on top of each other, tempers flare, and what do? We start fighting each other. We just start doing this shit to each other, man. Killing each other. The deep quiet of a Sunday morning had enveloped the small western Montana town of miners and mill workers last week when the blare of the prison alarm startled churchgoers leaving 9 a.m. services. As ambulance raced to the Montana State Prison 5 miles away and the alarm wail did not cease, County Attorney Chris Miller, who was mowing his lawn, recognized the signs of a major disturbance. Over the next 4.5 hours, inmates at Montana State staged the country's bloodiest prison riot in 11 years. In a planned uprising. Now it was a planned uprising. It didn't just happen. Prisoners seized control of a maximum security complex and killed 5 fellow inmates by hanging 3 of them from a cell block balcony by electric cords, local law enforcement officials said. The 5 dead were among 10 inmates held in protective custody. We already know about that part. We read that. Everything that could go wrong did, Miller said in an interview. The rioting inmates, who began by cutting a 3-foot-high break in an exercise yard fence, succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. The riot has set the rest of the country's overcrowded prison system on edge. For how long? Set them on edge for how long? Prisons are overcrowded everywhere, man. Look at all the people dying from COVID. I was in FMC Lexington, right? So overcrowded, man, that they had these things called bus stops. People were sleeping on top of each other in there, man. And that's why, so many people died in there over that COVID. That was one time when I thought, when all that stuff was breaking out, that we were on the verge of a riot at a low-security prison. And that's what the moral of the story is, man. Riots are dangerous, man. Riots can happen at any given moment. You don't want to be there, man. You don't want to be that dude. You don't want to be the guy that has to kill someone because you don't want them to kill you. You're serving 12 years, 13 years. You got a crack cocaine conspiracy. You're part of we'll just use it as an example because that's what was in the article. You're part of the Bloods, man. You're cellies. You're just a gang member. You're cellies with the shot caller. He's your right-hand man. Something breaks out in one part of the prison. These dudes storm your part. They say, we're getting our man. We're getting the shot caller. You're his cellie. There's no way out. You become a casualty. Okay, I respect it. It's part of your gang. But man, you're probably going to die. That kid right there, he died. He died a death that he didn't want to die. He died a death that he probably never contemplated would happen. He was right-hand man with the big homie. The dudes that controlled the prison. Of course he was safe. But you know what? Sometimes, man, when things pop off, nobody's safe. You got dudes that are like, man, I don't even care about myself. I'm going to get this dude no matter what. And they're determined, man. And they're determined. Those are the top 5, at least in my view, deadliest prison riots. Like I said, I was in Attica, man. Attica was a dangerous place. I seen the bullet holes still there in the windows, on the metal. It's a place that I never want to go back to. It's a place that I was at when I was 17 years old. It's a place that no 17-year-old should ever experience. And you know what, man? You're a father right now watching this video. It's our job, man. What's our job, Chad? It's your job to be the father, to be the leader that you're supposed to be. To stop this vicious cycle of prison, man. Let's not perpetrate this shit no more. Let's be dads, man. It ain't always easy. It ain't going to always be easy. But I'm a firm believer that your children are a product of their parents. We got to step it up, man. It ain't about us, man. We got to step it up. It's about them. It's about those 2 little guys upstairs, man. It's about your son that's laying in bed right now. He's 8 years old. He's dozing off. He's got school in the morning. It's about him, man. It's about changing that cycle. It's about breaking that cycle. Blood on the Razor Wire TV. I hope you enjoyed it, man. But more than anything, I hope it touched a chord. And that chord is that we got to stop that cycle and we never want to go back. Real fathers, real leaders, real men. With respect, until tomorrow, we're out.